This bull refused to bow to any rider, an untamable beast feared by all, until a crippled boy climbed onto its back. What happens next will leave you speechless. The first roar of the crowd shook the wooden rails of the arena. Dust rose in thick clouds as the black bull, ironclad, bucked furiously against the ropes that bound him inside the holding pen. His massive shoulders crashed against the planks, and the timbers creaked as though they would snap. Men leaned forward from the stands, their faces lit with excitement and a touch of fear, waiting to see who would dare climb onto the beast next. The harvest fair was in full swing, but here in the bull ring, all noise and chatter had narrowed into one thing: anticipation. Samuel stood pressed against the far side of the fence, his thin hands gripping the rough wood. His wooden brace squeaked whenever he shifted, the leather straps biting into his leg. Around him, men twice his size shouted wagers, laughing as another rider was dragged from the dirt, groaning and clutching his ribs. Samuel's heart hammered inside his chest, but his eyes never left Ironclad. He had waited all year for this moment, not for the gold or the prize the crowd clamored over, but for something quieter, more personal. He wanted to prove, at least once, that his father was wrong about him. The bull snorted, sending steam into the cool autumn air. His dark hide glistened with sweat, muscles twitching beneath the skin like coiled ropes. Samuel studied him the way a scholar might study a page of scripture, noting every flicker, every pause. He had done this for years, hidden in the shadows where no one bothered to notice the crippled boy who lingered too long near the stockyards. While others saw only chaos, Samuel traced a rhythm. Ironclad lifted his head before lunging left, paused 2 breaths before a backward kick, shifted weight to the right just before spinning. The bull was savage, yes, but not mindless. Samuel whispered to himself, "You're not wild, you're just waiting." "Why are you staring at him like that?" a voice muttered at his side. Elias, a stable hand with broad shoulders and weathered hands, leaned close. His face was lined with worry, his brow furrowed beneath a mop of hay-colored hair. He had known Samuel since he was small and often treated him like a younger brother. Samuel didn't look away from the bull. "Because no one else sees it. They think he's random, but he's not. He moves in patterns. I've watched him enough to know." His voice shook with excitement and fear, but there was a stubborn fire in it. Elias shook his head, glancing toward the arena where the next challenger was being strapped onto Ironclad's back. "Patterns won't keep you alive if you're under those hooves. Don't even think about it, Samuel. You'd last less than a heartbeat." Samuel tightened his grip on the fence. His brace squealed again as he shifted weight onto his good leg. "Maybe. Or maybe I'd last longer than anyone else." Before Elias could reply, a trumpet sounded, and the gate burst open. The bull exploded into the ring, hurling the rider high into the air. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the man crashed onto the dirt, landing hard on his shoulder. Ironclad turned and charged, his horns grazing the edge of the fence as the rider scrambled for safety. The stands erupted in wild cheers, a mix of awe and cruelty, as the man was dragged out half-conscious. Above the noise, Rowan Vexley's voice rang out. The wealthy rancher stood tall on the announcer's platform, his velvet coat far too fine for the dust of the ring. His lips curled in a mocking smile as he raised a hand for silence. "Men of Hallowbend, and all who have gathered for this fair," he shouted, his tone smooth but dripping with arrogance. "You have seen once again that Ironclad bows to no one. But let me sweeten the challenge this year. 1 full minute on his back, and the prize is not only gold, but Ironclad himself." The crowd erupted into disbelief and excitement, voices rising like thunder. Some shouted that it was impossible, others that they would be the one to do it. Rowan smirked, clearly amused by their foolish bravado. He looked down at the bull, who paced the ring with slow, menacing steps, his horns glinting under the lantern light. Samuel felt his chest tighten. A full minute, 60 seconds. No man had lasted 10. But Rowan's words lit a fire in him. Ironclad wasn't just a beast anymore. He was a doorway. If Samuel could do what no one else could, then maybe his father would look at him differently. Maybe Mason would see more than a crippled boy. The thought of Mason made his stomach twist. Somewhere in the crowd, his father stood with arms folded, his face carved from stone. Mason had once been a champion rider until a fall had ended his career and filled him with bitterness. Since then, his disappointment in Samuel had been clear in every glance, every silence. The boy could not run, could not work the fields, and Mason believed he could not ride. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. Tonight, he would prove him wrong. Another rider tried, and failed. Then another. Ironclad threw them all, leaving bruises and broken bones in his wake. Samuel's heart pounded harder with each failure, but not from fear, from resolve. He turned to Elias, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm going to do it." Elias grabbed his arm, his voice rising in panic. Samuel, no. Don't be a fool. You'll die in there. Your leg— My leg doesn't matter, Samuel interrupted, pulling free. His eyes were bright, almost fevered. I know how he moves. I've been waiting for this chance. Elias stared at him, then shook his head in despair. Your father will never forgive me if I let you try. Samuel gave a bitter laugh. He's never forgiven me for being me. This is the only way I can change that. The announcer's call echoed through the arena. Who dares next? Rowan shouted, his mocking tone daring someone to rise. The crowd hesitated. Men who had been so loud in their boasting now stayed silent, rubbing sore limbs and avoiding the rancher's gaze. The silence stretched until, from the far side of the ring, a single voice spoke. I will. The laughter was instant, cruel and sharp. Heads turned as Samuel stepped forward, brace clattering against the wooden planks with each uneven step. Mason's face turned crimson as he realized who it was. He half rose as if to drag his son back, but Samuel kept walking, his back straight despite the jeers. The crowd roared with mockery. The crippled boy? Let him try, someone shouted. Ironclad will end him before the first breath, another cackled. Rowan raised his brows, surprised, then smirked. Well, well, a brave spirit or a foolish one. Very well, boy. Let's see if you last even a moment. Samuel ignored them all. He walked to the gate, laid his hand on Ironclad's flank, and felt the bull's skin twitch under his touch. For the briefest moment, the beast stilled, his dark eyes flicking toward the boy with something like curiosity. Samuel's lips parted, and a whisper only he could hear slipped out. I've been waiting for you too. Ironclad snorted, pawing the dirt, but did not lunge. The stable hands exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever approached him without being thrown back, yet here he was, letting a crippled boy touch him. Samuel gripped the rough leather strap, his heart thundering in his ears. Every muscle in his body screamed with fear, but he forced himself onto the bull's back. The crowd's laughter turned to stunned silence. Rowan leaned forward, eyes narrowing with disbelief. Mason's fists clenched at his sides, torn between rage and dread. Elias pressed against the fence, his lips moving in silent prayer. The gatekeeper hesitated, then looked to Rowan. The rancher's smirk returned. He raised a hand and shouted, Let the boy prove himself, if he can! The latch dropped, the gate exploded open, and Samuel's world turned to thunder. But Samuel also carried a secret. He had studied Ironclad for years, watching every flick of his tail, every roll of his shoulders, and every pause before he bucked. While others saw a monster, Samuel saw patterns, a rhythm hidden beneath chaos. That year, as the fair approached, a cruel twist set the stage. Rowan Vexley, the wealthy rancher who owned Ironclad, announced that whoever could ride the bull for a full minute would win not just gold, but also the deed to the bull himself. Rowan smirked as he said it, for he believed no one could do it. Samuel, however, saw more than a prize. He saw a chance to silence his father's doubts and claim a destiny no one expected. The fairgrounds shook with the sound of hooves slamming against dirt. Ironclad lunged sideways, his horns scraping the wooden rails as another rider was flung like a rag doll, crashing into the dust. The man rolled, groaning, and scrambled to the safety of the fence while the bull pawed the ground in triumph. The crowd roared, their voices a mixture of awe and savage delight, as though the humiliation of each rider was as important as the challenge itself. Men shouted wagers, children climbed onto shoulders for a better view, and the smell of sweat, dirt, and roasted fair food thickened the air. From the shadows near the corner, Samuel sat still, clutching the handle of his wooden brace so tightly his knuckles turned white. His chest rose and fell with nervous energy, but his gaze was unshakable, fixed on the bull that seemed to defy every law of balance. He watched not with fear, but with a strange intensity, as though each movement Ironclad made was a secret he was desperate to understand. His lips moved silently, counting the beats between kicks, the dips of the head before a spin. Elias crouched beside him, his rough hand gripping Samuel's shoulder. His voice was urgent, pitched low so the crowd's shouts would not drown it out. You'll get yourself killed if you try. Look at him. He's not a beast. He's a storm. No one can hold against that. His eyes softened, and his jaw tightened with a mix of anger and worry. Don't make me watch you break, Samuel. But Samuel didn't blink, didn't turn to meet his friend's gaze. I've studied him, he whispered. His voice trembled, not from doubt but from the weight of conviction. He's not chaos. He has rhythm. Everyone else fights him, but I know when he'll turn, when he'll buck. If I can match him— Match him? Elias cut in, his voice cracking with disbelief. He looked at Samuel's thin frame, the uneven lines of the brace clamped to his leg. You can barely climb into a saddle on a quiet horse. This is madness. Samuel's hand tightened on the brace until it creaked. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming under the torchlight. "This is the only chance I'll ever have to show I'm more than what they say I am." His words hung in the air, heavy, almost desperate. Before Elias could argue further, Rowan Vexley's commanding voice boomed across the arena. "Who dares next?" The wealthy rancher's tone was mocking, a challenge disguised as invitation. He stood tall on the platform, coat shining under the lanterns, his smug grin daring the men to humiliate themselves for his amusement. The crowd's laughter swelled as no one stepped forward immediately. Ironclad snorted, pawing at the dirt, tossing his massive head as though daring the men himself. Samuel's heart pounded harder. This was the moment. Without another word to Elias, he rose, leaning on the brace as it groaned beneath his weight, and stepped toward the arena. The sound of laughter shifted instantly. Gasps, chuckles, outright cackles. The crippled boy, hobbling forward, became the night's newest joke. "Look at him!" someone jeered. "The bull will snap him in two before he takes his first breath." Another voice rose above the laughter. "This isn't a show for children." Samuel kept moving, one uneven step at a time. His father's figure caught his eye in the stands. Mason, stiff and grim, his face twisted in shame. The man turned away, unable to watch, his shoulders rigid with disappointment. The sight stabbed at Samuel's chest like a blade, but it only hardened his resolve. When he reached the gate, the stable hands hesitated. One of them, a burly man with a scar down his cheek, leaned close and muttered, "This isn't wise, boy. He'll crush you." His voice held no malice, only pity, but Samuel met his gaze with fire. "Open it," he said. His tone was quiet, yet unwavering. The man exchanged a look with his companions, then reluctantly nodded. Samuel stepped closer to the bull. Something remarkable happened in that instant. Where Ironclad had bellowed and thrashed against every other challenger, he stilled. His chest rose and fell in deep, measured breaths. His ears flicked, his nostrils flared, but he did not lunge. The air around the ring shifted, quieter, heavier. Samuel lifted his trembling hand and laid it against the bull's side. The coarse hide was hot beneath his palm, vibrating with raw strength. He whispered, his words lost to the crowd but not to himself. "You're not my enemy." Ironclad snorted, the sound harsh, but his massive body did not move away. The stable hands froze, unsure whether to intervene. Elias stood pressed against the rails, his face pale, his mouth open in shock. Mason did not turn back, but his knuckles whitened on the wooden rail he gripped. With a deep, steadying breath, Samuel reached for the leather strap. The crowd's laughter faded into stunned silence as, with deliberate effort, he pulled himself onto Ironclad's back. The brace squeaked, his muscles strained, and for a heartbeat, it seemed he would fall. But then he was seated, balanced, his legs gripping the bull's sides. Rowan's mocking chuckle broke the silence. "Well, this will be short." The gatekeeper looked uncertain, his hand trembling on the latch. Rowan waved his hand dismissively. "Open it. Let the boy learn." The latch dropped. The gate burst open. Ironclad exploded into motion like thunder breaking loose from the clouds. His hooves slammed the earth, dirt spraying into the air as his massive frame twisted violently. Samuel's body whipped back and forth, his arms straining to hold the strap, his legs clamped desperately against the bull's sides. The crowd gasped, a wave of disbelief washing through them. "Hold on, Samuel!" Elias shouted, though his voice was swallowed by the storm of noise. Mason turned his head, expecting to see his son already in the dirt, but his jaw clenched tight when he realized Samuel was still on. Ironclad twisted, bucked, spun with savage fury, but Samuel clung like a shadow, his body swaying not against the bull, but with him. He moved when Ironclad moved, braced when Ironclad paused. His eyes burned with concentration, every ounce of strength and instinct sharpened to a single purpose: hold. Seconds dragged like hours. The crowd's laughter was gone now, replaced by cheers, shouts, even disbelief. Some called for Samuel to fall, others for him to hold. Rowan's smirk faltered slightly as he watched the boy defy every expectation. Still, the minute had not yet passed, and Rowan's smug confidence remained. At 30 seconds, the world shifted. Ironclad, who had been bucking and twisting with all the fury of a storm, suddenly stopped his rhythm. The crowd leaned forward in confusion, expecting a pause before the next violent strike. But what followed was nothing anyone had seen before. With a guttural snort, the bull hurled his massive body sideways, not into open space but against the fence of the arena. The wood cracked and groaned beneath the impact, dust raining down from the posts. Samuel was slammed hard, his leg colliding with the rail, and the sound of splintering wood was joined by the sharper crack of his brace giving way. Pain shot through him like fire, blinding and merciless. His body lurched, nearly pitching forward, and for a heartbeat it seemed the crowd would see him thrown like all the others. Gasps erupted, a collective cry of alarm echoing across the fairgrounds. Samuel's breath caught in his throat as the broken brace bit into his skin, but in the chaos of agony he found one thought: hold. He locked his hands around the thick strap, pressing his chest against Ironclad's back, leaning into the bull's massive frame instead of resisting it. The beast slammed again, and again Samuel shifted with him, absorbing the punishment, refusing to yield. Men in the stands shouted warnings. "He'll crush him against the rails. Get him off there before he's broken." Their voices blurred into a storm of noise, but Samuel could not hear them clearly anymore. His world had narrowed to the heat of the bull's hide beneath him, the pounding rhythm of hooves, and the searing ache tearing through his leg. Rowan Vexley's eyes flicked from the watch in his hand to the boy clinging to the bull. For the first time all evening, his smile faltered. The seconds crawled, and yet Samuel endured. Rowan's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the watch as though his own will might force the outcome. Then came the greater twist. Without warning, Ironclad stopped fighting. His movement slowed, then ceased altogether. The bull stood tall, his chest heaving, his dark eyes fixed not on Samuel but on Rowan. A hush swept across the arena so deep that even the night insects beyond the fairgrounds could be heard. Samuel felt it first in his body. The sudden stillness after so much violence was jarring, unnatural. He blinked through the sweat and dust, his arms trembling as he realized he was still on the bull's back. Slowly, the truth dawned. Ironclad had not yielded to strength. No man had ever bested him with force, and Samuel knew he had not done so now. The bull had chosen to stop, not from defeat, but from recognition. Ironclad's sides heaved with deep breaths, his ears twitching as he glared across the arena. His massive head turned toward Rowan, nostrils flaring, and for the first time the crowd saw not a beast resisting a rider, but a creature standing in silent defiance. Samuel's chest tightened. He understood, though he could not explain how. Ironclad had felt the difference, the respect in Samuel's grip, the lack of arrogance in his hold. Where others sought to conquer, Samuel had simply sought to endure, to move with rather than against. And the bull, impossibly, had decided to stand with him. The silence of the crowd broke into a roar as the minute hand struck. Cheers erupted, rolling through the stands like thunder. Men who had mocked Samuel now leapt to their feet, their voices ringing with disbelief and admiration. "He's done it! The boy's tamed the beast!" Their shouts mingled with clapping and whistles, a storm of celebration sweeping the fairgrounds. Mason, who had turned away earlier, now pushed forward to the edge of the arena. His face, pale with shock, softened into something Samuel had longed to see: pride. His voice, thick with emotion, carried over the noise. "Samuel!" He gripped the rails, his hands shaking as he called his son's name, his eyes gleaming with both disbelief and joy. Elias, pressed against the fence, could hardly breathe. His heart hammered as he watched the boy he had tried to protect not only survive but achieve the impossible. His lips parted, but no words came, only a sharp exhale of wonder. Rowan, however, stood frozen, his face reddened, trembling with rage as he tried to speak above the crowd. "No! This is invalid!" His voice cracked, but he forced it louder. "The brace! The boy's brace gave him leverage no man had before! This cannot stand!" He raised the stopwatch high, as though the authority of the ticking metal could erase what every eye had seen. But the people of Hallowbend were not with him anymore. They had witnessed Samuel ride where no one else could, seen the bull stand still beneath him instead of throwing him off. The truth had unfolded before them, undeniable. Their cheers only grew louder, drowning Rowan's protests. Ironclad, still standing tall, snorted violently as Rowan stepped closer to reclaim him. The bull jerked against the reins, pulling away with such force that the stable hands struggled to keep their grip. His eyes locked on Rowan, and each time the rancher moved forward, Ironclad's massive body surged back, hooves stamping into the dirt in open fury. The crowd gasped, laughter bubbling beneath their cheers as realization spread. The beast that had served as Rowan's prize and pride now rejected him openly. What was meant to humiliate a crippled boy had instead twisted into Rowan's ruin. Samuel, still clinging, could barely feel his burning leg anymore. Pain pulsed through him, but he sat taller now, his face lit with something fierce and unshakable. He was no longer the boy mocked at the gate, nor the cripple hidden in the crowd's shadow. He was the rider who had done what no man before him had achieved. Rowan's words fell flat, his gestures desperate, his authority crumbling under the weight of truth. The people no longer jeered at Samuel, they jeered at him. And worst of all for Rowan, Ironclad refused to be led back to him, pulling against the reins and snorting with fury every time Rowan approached. What was meant to humiliate a crippled boy had instead exposed Rowan's cruelty and turned him into the true fool of Hallowbend. The aftermath spread through Hallowbend like wildfire, carried on every voice, whispered in every tavern, and spoken of in every market stall, Samuel was no longer known as the boy with the broken leg. He was the rider who had done the impossible, the one who had stayed atop Ironclad when no other man had lasted more than a breath. The once mocked cripple became the name on every tongue, and his victory over Rowan's challenge reshaped the way the townsfolk saw him. Men who had laughed at his limp now clasped his hand with firm respect, bowing their heads when they met his gaze. Farmers who had once ignored him stopped to offer strong words of admiration. Traders passing through the fairgrounds paused to speak of the boy as though he were already legend. Children followed him in the streets, their wide eyes brimming with awe, and even men twice his age treated him not as a crippled youth, but as one of their own. For Samuel, the sudden weight of attention was dizzying. Only days before, he had been overlooked or mocked, regarded as fragile, a burden on his father. Now the very same people raised him up, his father most of all. Mason, once ashamed, now stood before his son with tears welling in his eyes. He pulled Samuel into his arms in front of all who would watch, his embrace rough and trembling. "I was wrong," Mason said, his voice breaking against the boy's shoulder. "I was wrong to doubt you. You've shown me what I never thought I'd see." His hands gripped Samuel's back as if anchoring himself to this new truth. For Samuel, the embrace was heavier than the cheers of the town. For years he had longed for that single moment, for his father to see him not as weak but as worthy. Now it was here, and it burned in his chest brighter than any victory. Yet glory carried shadows. Samuel felt it first in the uneasy glances cast toward him by strangers at the edge of gatherings. Then Elias, older and sharper in his instincts, leaned close one evening as they worked near the stables. "Rowan won't let this stand," Elias warned, his eyes narrowing toward the darkening fields. "He's been stripped of more than a bull. He's been stripped of pride, and men like him don't forgive that. I've seen faces I don't know hanging around your home. They don't look like farmers." Samuel listened, his jaw tightening. The old fear might have once taken hold of him, but something within him had shifted since that night in the arena. He had endured Ironclad's fury and earned his respect. He would not cower before Rowan's schemes. "If Rowan wants to send men," Samuel answered, his voice steadier than Elias expected, "then let him. I'm not running from him. Not anymore." At dawn, when the first light stretched over the meadows, Samuel began his training with Ironclad. The bull, once untouchable, seemed to sense his presence. Where others approached and were met with defiance, Samuel stepped forward and was met with calm. The great beast allowed him to lay a hand against his side, to walk alongside him, to speak in low tones that the bull alone seemed to understand. Day by day, Samuel learned not to resist Ironclad's strength, but to move with it, to guide instead of command. When Ironclad surged forward, Samuel leaned into the rhythm. When he slowed, Samuel steadied his breathing, adjusting his stance, learning to read the flick of an ear or the flare of a nostril as though they were words in a language meant for him alone. Elias watched, astonished, shaking his head one morning as Ironclad followed Samuel's gestures like a shadow. "It's as if he listens only to you," Elias murmured. "Like the beast has been waiting all this time for someone who sees him for what he is." Samuel touched the bull's hide, feeling the heat of its breath wash across him. "Maybe weakness was the key all along," he said softly. "Everyone tried to break him with power. I had nothing but respect." But Rowan's vengeance came swiftly. One afternoon, men arrived at the stables, hard-eyed strangers armed with ropes and spurs, riders Rowan had hired to reclaim his bull. They climbed into the ring, each boasting of their skill, each swearing they would break the beast that no boy should own. Ironclad did not suffer them. The first was hurled into the dirt before his boots had found balance. The second barely lasted longer, his cries cut short by the force of the bull's buck. One by one, Rowan's hired men were cast aside, spitting dust, groaning in pain, their pride trampled as easily as their bodies. The townsfolk gathered at the edges of the arena, their voices rising in disbelief. They had seen Ironclad's defiance before, but now it was sharper, more deliberate. It was as if the bull rejected all hands but one. Rowan, red-faced and desperate, shoved past his fallen riders. His voice thundered, trembling with fury. "Enough! I'll show you who owns this beast!" He seized the reins himself, pulling hard as he swung onto Ironclad's back. The crowd gasped, some shouting warnings, others watching with grim expectation. Samuel stood frozen, his hand tightening on the fence, his heart pounding. Rowan dug his heels in cruelly, striking Ironclad's flanks with boots and spitting words like venom. "You'll obey me, you wretched animal! You're mine!" But Ironclad was no longer the monster Rowan thought him to be. With a roar that shook the air, the bull reared back, his massive body arching high. Rowan clung desperately, his face twisted in panic as he tried to wrestle control with brute force. The bull bucked, twisted, and in a flash, Rowan was thrown. He hit the dirt with a sickening thud, his limbs sprawled, his pride shattered before the eyes of every man, woman, and child in Hallowbend. Gasps filled the silence that followed, then came laughter, laughter sharp and merciless, echoing across the arena where once Rowan's authority had ruled. Samuel stepped forward, ironclad lowering his great head toward him in recognition. The boy laid a steady hand on the beast, and together they stood as the crowd erupted, not in jeers this time, but in celebration of something greater than victory. From that day forward, Ironclad was no longer seen as a monster, but as a protector, and Samuel as the boy who had shown that strength was not measured by muscle but by heart. Hallowbend changed forever, and though Rowan sulked in disgrace, no one doubted who truly owned the bull. The boy who once limped in shame now stood tall, for Ironclad had chosen him, and together they became a legend no one would ever forget. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of empathy, resilience, and the profound bonds that can form between those who are often underestimated. This narrative aims to challenge assumptions about strength, inspire compassion, and highlight the extraordinary connections that can be found in the most unlikely of places.